You're listening to Planet Zero, a science fiction story by Brian Donahue, read by the author. Chapter 12, Into the Dark Unknown. Commander Gates held tight with both of his hands as he pulled himself into open space. He tried his best to control his breathing and to focus all of his attention on safely maneuvering his body across the wire. Setting a good pace would be key to making it over to the huge and mysterious alien object protruding out of the planet. It was menacing and dark. He stopped just long enough to look back and see that everyone had made it out of the ISRS safely, and they were now all attached in a single file to the wire. He stopped just long enough to look back and see that everyone had made it out of the ISRS safely, and they were now all attached in a single file line to the wire. Johnson came in over the intercom in his helmet. "Has anyone thought about what would happen to us if those waves start back up?" Montgomery shook her head and quickly said, "Nothing pleasant or healthy for our bodies. We'd probably be torn into shreds instantly." "Okay," said Gates. "Enough of that. Let's just focus on getting over to this thing, one step at a time. Figuratively, I mean." Johnson, Montgomery, Burton, and Gates all shared a short laugh together. After all, their situation was bizarre and terrifying. They were literally going into the dark unknown here. These four humans were adventuring in a way no human had ever adventured before. The four of them needed a quick release of negative energy, like the laugh they just shared. Gates looked up at the towering cylinder that loomed above them. It was monstrously large and more imposing from this point of view than he had imagined it would be. They were so close to the object that the pink ocean on the planet below could not be seen. He stared straight ahead and tried to keep his eyes on what he perceived was their destination point of contact. As he focused his attention on the shadow that the supposed entrance cast, he became more and more convinced that it was indeed a door or entryway of some kind. The writing just above the shadowy doorway captivated his imagination. An alien race really built this and used a form of writing to mark the front door. At least, he hoped this was the front door and a message of welcome, not one of warning to stay away. The team was about halfway across the wire when Burton exclaimed, "Commander, something is moving at the top of the cylinder." Gates motioned for everyone to stop so they could turn their attention fully to the object's new behavior. At the very top of the cylinder, three antenna-looking objects began to emerge. In perfect synchronism, they bent and laid down to 90-degree angles in different directions. It reminded Gates of the ancient windmills of Earth's past. Then they began to spin slowly and methodically. "Do you feel that?" asked Burton excitedly. They all brought their attention back to the wire that was now vibrating ever so gently under their hands. It wasn't a lot, but it had not been there before. Suddenly they all felt the need to get to the other side and off the wire as soon as possible. Gates asked the question, "Montgomery, do you think that this vibration is related to the spinning antenna up there?" Adina shook her head emphatically, but realized Gates wouldn't be able to see her doing so. She answered, "I would say that it's a pretty good bet the two are related, Commander." The antennas started spinning slightly faster, and the vibration of the wire increased again. Gates spoke with more intensity as well. "I'd like to get off this wire as quickly as possible. Focus on pulling yourself to that opening, but don't overdo it. There's still a lot of energy to be used if we get inside this thing and another spacewalk back to the ISRS when we're done." At the order of their commanding officer, the team focused on pulling themselves hand over hand until all of them were standing feet down on the alien object. Their magnetic boots kept them safely attached to the hull. To everyone's surprise and relief, the metal on the hull of the alien object was magnetic enough to keep them comfortably in place. They would be hard-pressed to continue further if their boots could not hold them firmly against the hull of the alien object. "Lucky us," said Montgomery. "I guess this means we're a go for trying to enter the object?" Gates grinned at Adina's sarcastic enthusiasm and said, "Absolutely. We have a crewmate to rescue and retrieve." The commander stood in the center of the opening and looked inside. He could see nothing but blackness. The darkness of the opening was a bit alarming to him. It was the stuff of nightmares, and he had learned long ago in his dreams, and in the movies, that entering such foreboding places never turned out well for the daring adventurers who wandered in. He shook off the notion, thinking of Atkinson, and gently pressed his fingers against the strange writing above the opening. He asked, "Adina, what do you make of this writing?" The engineer pressed forward to get a better look. She loved a good mystery. Adina stared at the writing for a moment, touched it as if that would help her understand it better, and then turned around. She looked up and down at the alien object, and then discovered it. "There," she said. "The same form of writing is also over there on the hall just below us, and again above us." Burton came alive with discovery himself, and said, while pointing, "It's on both sides of us, too. Look!" The rest of the team looked for the writing on the hall themselves with great anticipation. Sure enough, clear as day, there were 4 more alien inscriptions on the hull of the object. They were all at equal distances away from the opening, directly above, below, and on each side of it. Commander Gates was the first to speak. "X marks the spot, I guess." Montgomery was slowly, cautiously coming alive with excitement. Her eyes were wide as she examined more closely the details of the writing. She said with amazement, "Commander, look at this!" Gates leaned in closer to see the writing over the opening. He was taller than Adina and could see it almost at eye level. "What's so remarkable about it?" he asked. "Commander, it's very similar to Earth's Chinese language, only a bit more whimsical looking. And I would guess that their alphabet is only slightly larger than ours based on these symbols," exclaimed Adina. "I wish that I had a few more to compare this to, though." Adina seemed to forget all about her phobia of open space and asked, "Would someone help me up into this opening so I can sit on the edge to get a closer look?" Burton and Gates both nodded and assisted the engineer up onto the opening. The engineer sat with her legs inside the dark opening and leaned back out to look at the writing above her. She was now eye level with it, and she felt a rush of adrenaline flow through her veins. She inched a little closer to the writing and pressed her fingers firmly against the center letter. To her surprise, the letter pushed into the hull slightly as a button. A brilliant shaft of light suddenly appeared from within the opening. It completely blinded everyone and totally consumed Montgomery. Before anything could be done, she was enveloped by the white light shining from within. She was gone in an instant. In the next terrifying moment, the shaft of light disappeared, and the rest of the team was left standing there in utter dismay. Gates made a decision almost as instantly as the light had taken Adina and climbed up into the opening just as Montgomery had done a moment ago. He looked at the rest of the team and said, "I'm not losing another one of you. I'm going in after her. Hopefully we can get back out this way, but if I'm not back within 30 minutes, get back to the ISRS and do everything you can to pull away from this planet." Burton tried to protest, but before he could get it out, Gates had pressed the same button as Montgomery had and disappeared into the light. The next second, darkness filled the opening as if it had swallowed their commander whole and shut its mouth. Johnson stood gaping at the black opening and said, "What the heck just happened?" Burton slowly turned his attention from the dark void to his bag of explosives and said, "I guess I'm not going to get to blow anything up after all." Back in the command center of the Redemption, Chief Science Officer J.T. Brooks asked in stunned shock, "What do you mean they just disappeared?" The command center was aghast with surprise, and Brooks was growing weary of it. To him it seemed as if they had been living in a state of surprise ever since Atkinson was taken from them. He pressed into the Sensor 2 station behind James Miller as the sensor officer tried to make sense of his readings. Brooks asked, "Are you sure?" Miller tapped a few more controls and sighed. "It's the strangest thing. They were all there, and now there are only 2 of them on the outer hull of that thing." "Are their life signs stable?" asked Brooks. Miller responded quickly, "I'm reading elevated heart rates, but that's to be expected." Weapons Officer Stephen Moore entered the conversation. "They're on an alien object that seems hell-bent for leather, determined to take us one by one. No duh their heart rates are elevated." Brooks gave Moore a look that warned him to control his emotions. Moore was the most experienced officer in the command center, but Brooks outranked him and let him know it with the look. Brooks moved to the front viewport and asked the replacement pilot to prepare the engines for a fast burn. He knew the commander would want him to get the ship out of danger above all else, even if it meant leaving him behind on this alien world. The replacement communications officer cleared his throat. It was the very first sound he had made since replacing Atkinson. He was a long-haired academy graduate fresh out of his class and was greener than green. His name was William. Simply William. Back on Earth, he fancied himself a music artist of the electronic genre. He composed his own music and took on that side of his personality as the dominant one he desired to be known for. Moore glanced over to the young man and said, "If you've got something to say, music man, now's the time." William smiled and ignored the insult, friendly as it was meant to be. "Ever since that antenna started spinning, I can't get any form of communication from the team at the object or the ISRS. He pressed a few buttons that were flashing quickly, checked another readout, and said, "I'm positive we're getting interference from that antenna thingy." Brooks nodded his head and responded, "Is there any other way to communicate to our team besides the comms?" William answered, "Morse code?" Moore smiled and asked the entire command center crew, "Anyone have a flashlight?" Aboard the ISRS, Wright and Fox couldn't believe their eyes. Gates and Montgomery had entered into the abyss of the alien object. To make things worse, as soon as the vibration had started on the wire, they lost all communication with their crewmates and Redemption. When they saw Montgomery climb into the opening and then disappear, they gasped. When they saw Gates climb up into the opening and seem to intentionally go in after her, they both groaned. "Are you kidding me?" yelled Wright as he pounded his fist against the viewport window. Fox shook his head and stepped back away from the window. What he just saw took his breath away. He looked at the almost panicking Wright and said, "All right, we have to stay calm and try our best to anticipate what we need to be ready for next." Wright turned his attention back to his workstation. He sat down and said, "I'll keep working on our comms. There's got to be a way to break through this interference." Fox peered out the viewport window. The wire made a direct line from his point of view to the mysterious opening on the alien object. He could see Burton and Johnson standing next to the opening. They were emphatically involved in their own discussion about the situation. He could only imagine how helpless they felt. He hoped that Commander Gates had given them some kind of direction before he vanished. He placed his forehead in his hand and wiped the sweat from his brow. He sighed and turned to face the front viewport. As he brought his head out of his hand, he saw a flashing light coming from the command center viewport on the Redemption. "Wright, check this out," he said. When Wright saw the light, he whispered, "Brilliant! Good show, Redemption crew!" On the alien object, Burton saw the light first. He tapped Johnson on the shoulder and pointed towards Redemption. Johnson turned and saw it too. She shouted, "Bloody brilliant!" Then she turned back towards Burton and said, "I sure hope you know Morse code." Thank you for listening to this episode of Planet Zero. I'm the author and narrator, Brian Donahue. I'd like to invite you to like, share, and subscribe this on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. That will help get this amazing story into the hands of more science fiction fans around the globe. If you enjoyed this podcast, check out the BIG Sci-Fi Podcast with Adina, Brian, Chris, and Steve, the biggest sci-fi podcast in the galaxy, available just like this podcast, only on the Trek Geeks Podcast Network. Until next time, treat each other well, love your neighbors, and remember to look for the adventure in life every day.